has two aspects. Sins, which are the acts of sin that one commits, and the condition of the heart that prompts those sins. There's the sinful nature. Sin is a nature that causes us to sin. If we did not have a sinful nature, that doesn't mean, I suppose, that it would be impossible to sin, but it would be less likely to sin. That's why even after you've given your heart to the Lord and you've been born again, that it's a very short time before you feel all that pressure from the devil and that inward struggle that comes that causes you to want to rebel against God's laws, against God's plan for your life. And in our manual, article number 5 says, we believe that sin came into the world through the disobedience of our first parents, and death by sin. Now, that's spiritual death and physical death, because immediately they separated themselves from God, but then they began the process of slowly dying physically as well. They were kicked out of the garden, we know. So it says, we believe that sin is of two kinds: original sin or depravity, and actual or personal sin. In other words, the actual sins that one commits. We believe that original sin or depravity is that corruption of the nature of all the offspring of Adam, by reason of which everyone is very far gone from original righteousness, or the pure state of our first parents at the time of their creation. Averse to God, without spiritual life, and inclined to evil, and that continually. We further believe that original sin continues to exist with the new life of the regenerate until the heart is fully cleansed by the baptism with the Holy Spirit. We believe that original sin differs from actual sin in that it constitutes an inherited propensity to actual sin, for which no one is accountable until its divinely provided remedy is neglected or rejected. That means no one is going to go to hell simply because of Adam and Eve's sin. When Jesus died on the cross, He took away the guilt connected with Adam's sin. I said He took away the guilt connected with it, not the condition that is the result in our hearts from it. So we have, when we recognize there's a need, and we soon do after we've been born again, then we have to deal with it. So it goes on to say, we believe that actual or personal sin is a voluntary violation of a known law of God by a morally responsible person. In other words, a young child, before they reach an age where they're morally responsible, and it's not exactly the same for every child, a baby is not going to be, if a baby dies, we believe that they're covered by the atonement of Jesus Christ and they would go to heaven. But when that child gets old enough to begin to recognize that the things that he does are sinful, are wrong, because of a conscience that he has and because he's been taught, then he becomes responsible for that sin and then has to deal with it. It might not be the same for every child. A child growing up in a Christian home has more knowledge. But it used to be thought that it was around the age of 12. But I think with everything we have nowadays, children grow up a lot faster, don't they? And they probably reach an age of accountability before that. But what it is, God knows, and He's the judge and He's just. But so it goes on to say, it is therefore not to be confused with involuntary and inescapable shortcomings. In other words, that the actual sins that we commit are not to be confused with that. That's part of the fall. But the inbred sin is what causes us to disobey God. To have that attitude, I'm not going to do what God tells me to do. I'm going to go my own way and do what I want to do. So it's not just infirmities, shortcomings, faults, mistakes, failures, or other deviations from a standard of perfect conduct that are the residual effects of the fall. However, such innocent effects do not include attitudes or responses contrary to the Spirit of Christ, which may properly be called sins of the Spirit. In other words, if you hate somebody in your heart, that's a sin. If you have jealousy and those kinds of things, those are not acts, but those are thoughts and those are feelings that you have inside. We believe that personal sin is primarily and essentially a violation of the law of love, and that in relation to Christ, sin may be defined as unbelief. Well, there's several scriptures given there, and I know that was kind of a lengthy statement, but I wanted to begin with this because this is the question that I want us to think about this morning. And I think we know what the answer is according to our theology, but then I'm going to ask this question anyway. What is the nature of a person at birth? You see, there are some psychologists that would say that at birth a person is just like a blank slate, and that all of the influences in their life affect them to have the character and be the person that they are. If you believe that, then you would have to believe that influence and education and all those things could take away the sinful nature. But we know that's not true, don't we? Because it's not just uneducated people that sin, it's educated people. You can be highly educated. You can have a PhD. Some of the people that have gone to prison for terrible crimes have been geniuses. If they did an IQ test, they were geniuses. People that are very smart. So education itself cannot rid one of the sin problem. The sin problem is a problem that exists as a result of the sinful nature that is there because of our forefathers, our parents, Adam and Eve, and all those who've gone before. So the sin nature is passed on from generation to generation. Now, this is the purpose of the virgin birth. So that Jesus would not be born in the natural way with a natural father and mother, and the sexual relationship between a man and a woman who would both be sinners by birth, and therefore they pass on the sinful nature. But Mary was a virgin. She was overshadowed by the Holy Spirit. And so when Jesus was born, he was born of a miraculous birth, and so he did not have a sinful nature. But everyone else, since Adam, was born with that sinful nature, that separation from God. So having read that statement from our manual so that you understand what our theological statement is about this, and having explained a little bit about it, and asked the question, what is the nature of a person at birth? We're asking, is it a sinful nature or a nature bent toward evil, or is a person born with a neutral disposition that can be shaped and formed by education, environment, and etc.? And we are saying that it is a sinful condition. A person's nature at birth is sinful. That precious little baby that you see there, when that baby is first born, and when the baby comes into this world out of the mother's womb for the first time and is slapped on the behind so that it'll start to cry and begins to breathe the air of this world and cries and has needs to eat and so on, that precious little baby, as precious as it may seem and innocent as it may seem, has a sinful nature. It's born with that nature. We call it the Adamic nature, the Adamic sin from Adam, because it comes from Adam. So we say it's the Adamic nature, the carnal nature. It's a depraved nature, depravity. We've probably all heard some of those terms. Talk about, you ever hear somebody talk about a person being a depraved person? Well, sometimes the world describes somebody as a depraved person when they commit terrible acts of violence and against society and against other human beings and so on. But the reality is, every person born into this world has a depraved nature. That means that person is separated from God and His holiness, and they have not a they're not like a blank slate, they have a bent towards sin. So this morning I want to